So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeremy Travis, and I'm privileged to be the president of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And I'm delighted and honored and thrilled to welcome all of you here to this, what we call the Founding Generation Symposium. We have a really wonderful program in store for you. We have opportunities afterwards for people to mingle and say hello, share war stories, remember time that you worked together. This is a great moment for the college. But first of all, I just want to say, what do you think of the new building? It is a great privilege for me to be the president at the time we get to cut the ribbon. I know that there's a lot of work that went on before this moment, but what a transformation it's been for the college, for our students and our faculty and our staff to have this magnificent space that we can now call home. So some of those of you who are members of the founding generation, when we were talking outside, you were counting the number of homes that John Jay has had. I think, John Grimes, you started me on this. First home was? No. Before the police academy?
68th Street.
Baruch, right? Yes, Lorraine, right? Baruch. Then the police academy?
There were classes before Baruch in the Bronx.
I didn't know about the classes in the Bronx. Is this in Markowitz's book or not? Right? Classes in the Bronx, then Baruch, then the police academy, then Park Avenue South, then North Hall, South Hall, South Hall. Where was the Rathskeller? North Hall. I never saw the Rathskeller, so it is legendary, however. I don't know. And then moved into this building, Jerry, in 1980-something, 88. And then now we've taken the rest of the block down to 11th Avenue, and this is our campus. We have a home. It feels so good that this is our campus, and this is our campus forever. So it's a wonderful moment to be here. So let me just give you a little of the background of the genesis of this symposium. As we've been thinking about this building and opening this building, we wanted to use this as an opportunity to reconnect with some of the alumni of the college, both students and faculty and staff, who were here in the critical early years of John Jay. We thought this was a time to bring people home, to show you the new building, to show you the new campus, but also as a very profound way of saying thank you. Because if you remember the history, we're about to talk about that history, there was a time after the college was founded, and the college almost went under. And the people who were here during that time, from 64 to whenever we count the mid to late 70s, when the college was saved, we are calling that generation the founding generation of the college. The people who started the college, set us off on a certain path, and at a critical moment saved John Jay from the chopping block. We would not be here without you. We would not be here without both of those acts, the act of the definition of the college. What is John Jay? What are we about? What does it mean to be a liberal arts institution for students who are interested in justice? And then obviously the time when that experiment almost ended. But because of some action that you took, we're still here to tell the tale. So we thought about the Founding Generation Symposium as a way of saying thank you as we open the building and reintroducing you to the new John Jay campus. So as good bureaucrats do, what I did was I put together a committee. Right? When you want to get something done, you get people around the same table, and we put together a committee that was chaired by Rich Kohler, who was somewhere here, there he is, right? Richie Kohler, who has the distinction of being an alumnus and a former professor and a good friend of mine, fellow. We worked together in the police department for many years, and other members of that committee. Now, what happened? I sat in on some of those meetings, and what happened was we couldn't stop them from talking, sharing stories, and telling tales about the early days of John Jay. So the first thing I would like to do before we get started is just to be clear who's here, just to ask anybody who was a student or faculty member or staff who could call themselves a member of the founding generation from 1964 to 1977 just to stand, so we can say thank you. Thank you so much. So here's the program that we have in mind. We're going to show you a short film. Following that film, there'll be a panel discussion, and I'll introduce the panelists in a second. Following the panel discussion, I will come back and talk a bit about John Jay today. And then we have another discussion that'll be very distinctive, because the members of the planning committee for this event wanted to have an opportunity to pair up some existing students at John Jay and some alumni from John Jay. Speaking of existing students, Professor Richardson has brought his entire class here. So welcome to the John Jay class of whatever you are. You see is this one class, Reggie? Big class, whoa. So it's very important for the students who are here to understand the history of the institution. Is this really one class? I feel like that scene in the movies with the telephone booth where the clowns keep coming in. Is that it? Yeah, right. That's a bigger class. So, so then we'll come back and we're going to pair up some students with alumni. What struck the committee, and I think I can speak on behalf of the committee, was the similarities between the students who are here now and the students who came to John Jay in the early years. So we want to explore some of those similarities. There are obviously many differences as well. We'll talk about those differences and similarities. Then we'll have a reception outside. Then we have, for those of you who are staying for the alumni reunion, upstairs in the gym, a dinner, and two awardees, one of whom is our Professor Award recipient, one Blanche Wiesen-Cook, who's here and will be on the film in a moment, and our alumni recipient at the alumni reunion tonight for his award is Sal Casano, who's the Commissioner of the Fire Department, distinguished alumna. So at this moment, I'm going to introduce the panelists, just ask them to stand where they are, and then when the film is over, they'll come right up and start the discussion. And you'll see that we've collected a very distinguished panel. I'll start with our moderator. We're very fortunate and I'm very grateful personally that Sam Roberts agreed to moderate this panel. Sam is a reporter for the New York Times. He's written a number of books about New York history. He is the host of a New York One show. If you like watching New York politics, you'll understand why his show gets, in my household, gets attention every night, every week when New York Times Close-Up comes on. He has been a chronicler of the changes in New York, both political and demographic as well. So please join me in welcoming Sam Roberts. Our first panelist is Blanche Wiesen-Cook, who's a distinguished professor of history and women's studies at John Jay. And she also holds a position at the Graduate Center of City University of New York. A few years ago, the New York State Council on Humanities awarded Professor Cook the honor of being called the Scholar of the Year. She is the biographer of Eleanor Roosevelt. She's now at work on the third and final volume of the definitive biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. The first two made the New York Times bestseller list, and we all await the third volume. Blanche, you told me recently it's almost there. And we are so honored to have Blanche Cook as a member of our faculty, and particularly our wonderful history department, which has so many scholars, such great distinction. So please welcome Blanche Wiesen-Cook. Speaking of historians, another member of the panel is Mike Wallace. Mike Wallace is also a distinguished professor of history here at John Jay, co-author of the book Gotham, History of New York City to 1898. That book won the Pulitzer Prize a number of years ago. John Jay, by the way, now has 2 Pulitzer Prize winning faculty. It's one of the few public universities in the country that has not one but 2 members of our faculty who've won Pulitzer Prizes. Interestingly, they're in the humanities, in history and in English. Professor Wallace also founded the Gotham Center in New York, of New York History at the Graduate School. and has curated a very important exhibit at the Museo del Barrio and New York Historical Society on Nueva York, the experience of Spanish descendants in New York. So please join me in welcoming Mike Wallace. Another familiar face to many of us who's come to join us today is Dick Ward. Dick Ward was Vice President of John Jay. He's held similar positions of great distinction in a number of different universities. Most recently, he's now the Associate Vice President for Research and Special Programs at the University of New Haven. Previously was the Dean of the Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Science there. Did wonderful work as an educational leader and innovator at Sam Houston State University and University of Illinois at Chicago, and really, in my way of thinking about Dick's contribution, really broke open the international dimensions of the criminal justice field in very important ways. He's been honored by the Republic of China for that work, and we're delighted to have him back here, Dr. Dick Ward. And the final member of our panel is somebody I wanted to spend a little extra time on. That's Jerry Lynch. I apparently didn't have to spend any time. It's a great moment in my life when Jerry called me to say that he was had decided, in fact, to retire as president of John Jay. And he didn't say as much because he's too polite, but I think was sort of hoping that I might put my name in the hat to succeed him. This is a remarkable institution, unique in the world, that stands on its own. The brand value of John Jay is quite phenomenal, literally around the world. And we're a hot school. We have so many students who want to come here, and it's because of the reputation of the college and the scholarly contributions and the teaching prowess of our faculty, and the energy of our students and what they do here and after they graduate. And the man who kept that dream very much alive for the 28 years of his presidency and earlier during his time as a member of the faculty is the man I'm proud to call my predecessor. Please join me in welcoming Jerry Lynch. So, time to enjoy a film. And then after the film, the panel will come up and do what panels do.
I'm a historian, and people don't care very much about history, unfortunately.
What's history? The worst thing you can say about somebody really is he's history.
Almost all the police officers were history majors.
History was actually the most popular major after criminal justice.
Understanding how this world came to be, understanding that the past is in fact not dead, but it runs into and through the present and into the future. To the degree you understand that, you empower yourself.
It's important to have a sense of why today we are as fierce advocates for justice as we were almost 50 years ago. John Jay was very much a product of the 60s. It was a time of questioning of virtually every aspect of American society.
There was a lot of tension around policing. I mean, the Vietnam War was underway, civil rights initiatives were underway, and the police officer was right in the middle of it.
I said to myself, or it dawned on me, this is an amazing experience. This is really historic. The police, who had been kept separate in the training academies, being brought into the university.
When the college began in 1965, it only had 1,000 students. Those students could only choose one major, and that was police science.
We had about 40 faculty members, a very biblical number. And many of them were what we call practitioners, people who had had careers in the police department, the fire department.
I became a part of John Jay by helping to create John Jay. I'm one of those who's I was going to say founding fathers, but that would be politically incorrect. And the first name for the college, I know you'll laugh, was COPS, College of Police Science. And then we thought to give it the dignity that it deserved, it became the John Jay College of Criminal Justice.
The people who were at the core of the college at that time were Leonard Reisman, who was the president, and he died rather early in that period. And the provost at the time was Don Riddle, and he became the president. John Cammett became dean of faculty, and I think it was Dick Ward who became dean of students.
My main memory of that first semester is the fact that at the time the entire faculty of the college was in one room in the police academy, 3 or 4 to a desk. We had a drawer and a key, and that was the extent of our office.
What was the right curriculum for the college? What was the mission that this college should have?
The mission was really articulated wonderfully by Don Riddle, the president. He said, how shall we educate the police office, law enforcement people, like everyone else?
One of the arguments that was made in the beginning for the creation of John Jay College was to humanize the police department, to expand its awareness of the larger world. And I mean, I have to say, I found that just a little overdone. The cops were a lot shrewder about the way the world worked often than some of my colleagues were.
I had tried to get into a lot of other colleges when I came out of the United States Navy, but I had an equivalency diploma at the time, and no other college would take me.
Here I am, this sort of scraggly-haired 17-year-old, fresh out of high school, and sitting in the same classroom with me would be a bunch of guys with, who were bigger, older, some cases balder, some cases fatter, and almost to a man with a gun on the hip.
You could be talking and fascinated by this gun. I just thought we should talk about it. To obviously, as a psychologist, what else would I suggest?
I mean, I would always say, after I said something very controversial, which was general, I would say, in my opinion, I would say it 3 times.
I was more worried about the professor and what kind of a grade I would get and whether I would meet the professor's expectation than I was about everybody around me has a gun. Everybody around me had a gun since I was 17 years old and went in the Navy.
I think they were more startled by the fact that their professor was wearing sandals than anything else. The sartorial politics were more disturbing.
College to me was something that was remarkable. I didn't believe I was there.
I saw one of the students and he waved and I said, "Hi, Mr. Gray." That was his name. "Hi, Mr. Gray." And he shouted out, "Hi, Karen." And Don Riddle said, "Only at John Jay, the faculty members are younger than their students, and the students would feel comfortable enough calling their teachers by first name, but the teachers are calling them Mr. and Ms."
The discussion would be about, what do you think about the student protest at was it Columbia or NYU? And I'd be, spouting off about, having been there, and a cop on the other side of the room would be saying, "Yeah, I was there, and did I bust your head open?"
Somebody in a car had said to me, "Thank you, officer, for protecting us from them." I said, "I'm not protecting you from them." So the police in these situations are in a very interesting predicament. One, protect our rights and protect us from this abuse, and then on the other side, make sure that you maintain order. Let's not have chaos here.
The semester when Kent State happened, I was finishing my first semester teaching.
Colleges were closing all over the country in protest against the Vietnam War. Howard Umansky and I, at a faculty meeting, argued that John Jay should close. The faculty determined that the students should decide.
I was very much opposed to that time. I don't want to see a college closed.
I remember a student saying to me, a police officer, the reason the police officers so hated the students at Columbia during the strike was that they were throwing away an education we could never hope to get, and now we're getting it at John Jay.
And the vote was held. As I recall, there was a lot of lobbying going on both sides, very appropriately. Finally, the students voted 52% to 48% not to close. But I think it was an event that helped the college be seen as a regular college.
And then we had a chancellor, an assistant chancellor, whose name was Julius C.C. Edelstein. And he's the chancellor who gave us open enrollment. Until open enrollment, less than 3% of high school graduates were admitted into any of the city university colleges. He had a motto, and I think it's a perfect motto for all of us. It's better for everybody when it's better for everybody.
I owe my job to open admissions.
But then suddenly arrives, blacks and Puerto Ricans and Irish, Italian working class kids who are civilians, as they said.
It was the cops and the kids, and there were those who felt it was inevitable that it would be a conflict between the cops and the kids. It was, but it was exciting, and we weren't afraid of it.
The conversations and the interactions in the classrooms that this produced were just perfectly astonishing.
One day I did lose control of the class over the war in Vietnam. The students started throwing chairs at each other, and they broke some windows. And after that, for a long time, I didn't have a room with windows.
With the greater number of students, the number of majors in the college just about doubled. It created a tremendous crisis for the faculty. Were we just like any other liberal arts college, or were we a college that really had a focus on criminal justice?
My sense of Don Riddle, and certainly Jerry Lynch, is that they supported the liberal arts.
As we went on, and many decided we'd have other majors, the ones who were early coming into it, I think, felt that it was going to leave the mission.
We really had very limited resources, and it was important for the college, and I think it remains important that we have a special mission together with liberal arts majors.
As the crisis deepened in 75 into 76, the media, the banks, the city began to look for scapegoats.
They put free tuition at the City University of New York at the top of the list of things that were outrageous sins that New York City had committed, were quasi-socialist initiatives. Well, if New York City can do this, why can't Minneapolis? Well, good question. Why not Minneapolis instead of, say, the Vietnam War?
And then one morning at 7 o'clock, I was about to go into the shower. I opened the New York Times, and it said 5 colleges will be closed.
They wanted to cut, that is, eliminate John Jay College of Criminal Justice completely.
First of all, we were young, that we were targeted.
We were the new kid on the block, so to speak.
Second of all, that we were dispersed, this dispersed student body.
The attitude was that John Jay didn't have a constituency.
And third, I think the Board of Trustees didn't think anyone would care about cops, quite frankly.
When I got out of the shower, I remember talking to my wife, and she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "Don't do anything too crazy."
Suddenly, every effort had to be aligned to the one purpose of saving our college.
You do what you can. If it means there's a rally going on, you show up at the rally. If it means that there's an envelope to be stuffed with a letter, you stuff an envelope.
We did publicity that said "Save John Jay." And it got all over the city and all over taxis, and we were on commercials. My wife was in the playground with my son. She said, Mommy, what's that?" And my wife said, "I think it's a plane that writes in the sky." And somebody said, "It says, 'Save John Jay.'" My wife said, "Oh, no, he didn't do that."
It was a totally spontaneous thing. We're rallying outside the, what was then the main building of 56th Street, and then all of a sudden it's like, we're going to a central office. Sure. And
We marched through the streets, and several of the police said to us, "The police are going to stop us. The police are going to get us."
When the marches took place, I was actually in a hospital bed in Lenox Hill Hospital, and the march of the John Jay protesters passed Lenox Hill Hospital, and I heard them from my hospital bed marching on to 80th Street.
There were cops on duty that this was an unauthorized march, it was a spontaneous march to the board, and they stopped traffic and facilitated.
We would, applaud them and they would applaud us.
It was quite, exciting.
We went to the, where the Board of Trustees were meeting to make our feelings known. They're sitting at 86th Street. They don't know what's going on.
The chancellor said, "Jerry, stop them." And I said, "I can't, because you should hear from them."
Red light, green light, didn't matter. Cars would stop, we'd walk through.
They were defying the rules of their job and risking their jobs to allow this march to go on because the college was so important to them.
The New York Times came out for us. So did the governor.
When Chancellor Kibbe got into a cab and the cab driver said to him, "Are you one of those people who are going to end the education of cops?" that the chancellor realized that he had lost the fight to close the college.
And we ultimately saved the college.
That was a tough fight. I'm proud of the people who were still here and who made that fight, and particularly Jerry Lynch.
Putting this in a larger citywide and national context saved our bacon, but of course not all of our bacon.
We had to focus our very limited resources on the criminal justice and related majors.
But we continued to teach our courses, and history and literature was always required. Now you can major in it again. And these liberal arts majors are popular.
Ask the alumni what they think. So many thousands of alumni who think this was a good deal, and a very good deal.
It's very difficult to imagine the comparison between several classrooms on the 6th floor in the police academy and a college that has, 18,000 students. I'm not even sure. It's just a vast college. But I'm very proud, even prouder now, to say that I came from John Jay because of what it's become. It was very good to me back then, and now it's a terrific model for the country, I think.
What a wonderful tribute that was to the college and to all of you who helped keep the college where it is today. Thank you, President Travis. I'm going to speak very briefly, then ask some questions of the panelists, and then try, if we have enough time, to take some questions from the floor. My cell phone is out only so I can see the time. I'm not going to distract myself with anything else. While I was preparing to come here, I was looking through some old articles in the New York Times about John Jay and found this one. A 20-year-old student caught 2 alleged car thieves yesterday afternoon inside John Jay College, where they had run to elude police after stealing a taxi cab. The student was studying full-time to become a Suffolk County police officer, and he was on security duty to help pay for his college education. What other college could you find a story like that happening? I mean, that is yet again a tribute to John Jay. We heard a lot about it in this film about history. They say that journalism is the first draft of history, something I'm familiar with. Some journalists may have carried that to extremes. There is the famous, and I think undoubtedly apocryphal story of the correspondent who was assigned to the former Soviet Union. And he arrived in Moscow, and 3 days later he called his editor, and the editor said, "Well, do you have a story for me?" And he said, "I don't have a story yet, but I just finished a full-length book." And the editor said, "You finished a book? You've been there 3 days." And what's it called, he said. And the correspondent, completely unfazed, said, Russia, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. This symposium is mostly about yesterday, and that squares with one of the kids in Alan Bennett's play, what one of the kids said in Alan Bennett's play, The History Boys. When he was asked to define history, he replied more or less, well, it's just one damn thing after another. Early in the history of John Jay, someone likened the college to a combination between two TV series, The Paper Chase and White Shadow, which was about a basketball coach. And Leonard Reisman, who you saw in the film, said that police administrators were beginning to recognize that as the general level of education rises, the level of education of cops must keep pace and even move ahead. As someone said, I think Jerry Markowitz said in the film, John Jay was a product of the 60s. A lot of us forgot what the 60s were like. Some of the students here never knew what the 60s were like, except by studying history. Mike Wallace, remind us, what were they like? Why was that an opportune time to found a college for cops? And why did free tuition become such a toxic issue nationwide?
Thanks, Sam. I actually prepared some remarks on answer to that question in a desperate attempt to maintain the time constraints. And in a sense, pretty much I've been made redundant by that splendid film, but I'm going to take a shot at it, overseeing this entire period anyway. 1965 to 1977 was a jam-packed period. Lots of things were going on, but one of the period's primary obsessions was space travel, of which the moon landing in 1969 was a high point. Given this, I think it might help me sum up 10 years of John Jay's early history in 5 minutes if I metaphorically liken the college to a rocket. We'll call it the SS, that's spaceship, the SSJJ, and I'll liken its early history to a launch into the heavens. To anticipate and outline the argument, one could say that after a preparatory design and engineering period running back into the 1950s, the JJ's first stage engines were ignited in June 1964 when an independent college was authorized, a decision fueled by growing urban tensions for which a liberal arts education for police officers was a perceived partial remedy. The second stage ignited in July 1969 with the authorization of open admissions, which dramatically altered the faculty and student mix and expanded the JJ's mission. The third stage was ignited in February 1976, at which point the mission was nearly aborted by ground control. The college was nearly shut down, as you've seen, in the face of the so-called fiscal crisis. But through the heroic efforts of the crew, combining the efforts of first and second stage members, the mission was saved and the college, though damaged, rocketed upwards, achieved escape velocity, and has been flying higher ever since. Now, to flesh out this outline briefly, the preparatory stage came out of an alliance of several forces. Mayor Wagner was devoted to public and professional education. So were key leaders in the New York Police Department. So were academic leaders at Brooklyn, Baruch, and then the new CUNY, formed in 1961. By the mid-60s, all were aware that the civil rights movement had deepened long-standing antagonisms between the NYPD and the city's African-American and Puerto Rican communities, tensions that erupted 1 month after John Jay was launched, when a police-civilian altercation escalated into the Harlem riot of July 1964, the first in a series of long, hot summers that would sweep the country over the next 4 years. Senior police, political, and academic authorities believed that a liberal education could help police understand the background of the situation in the streets, thereby increasing their sensitivity and perhaps help in defusing the urban crisis. Patrick Murphy, in 1963 commander of the police academy, argued that, quote, policemen have become ill-equipped to handle the many social, political, racial, and domestic situations that are arriving. This attitude was shared by Mayor Lindsay, who himself arrived in 1965, just months after John Jay was inaugurated as an independent college, and who in 1970 would make Murphy commissioner. This first stage thrust was powered not only by riots, but by rising crime, which now began a takeoff that would rocket upwards through the 60s and 70s. This motivated the Johnson administration to establish a commission that in 1967 recommended funding college education for police officers, and in 1968 such a program was established. It helped John Jay's student body to double. So did the 1966 GI Bill for Vietnam vets. Those students remained overwhelmingly white and male. Stage 2 was powered by the civil rights movement, which encouraged Black and Latino communities to push for expansion of educational opportunity, and by a corporate concern that they needed literate trained workers for their expanding white-collar sector. A plan was set in place for gradual expansion of access, but student demonstrations in the spring of '69 won an accelerated schedule. The arrival of open admissions in fall of 1970 brought major changes to John Jay. The size of the faculty shot up, as did the student bodies, from 2,600 to over 8,600. The police-civilian ratio shifted from civilians being 1 in 5 to being more than half. It changed in social composition, too, rising to 1/3 Black and Hispanic, and many of the rest being ethnic white high school graduates, Irish, Italian, Jewish, not necessarily interested in criminal justice. The newer students were much younger and less affluent than the police students, and while this both made for fantastic educational experiences, it also engendered cultural clashes. But it was not internal tensions that threatened to abort the mission, but outside forces. That famous '75 headline, "Ford to City Drop Dead," was misleading in the sense that he never actually said that. But it was close enough to being true in its essence, pushed by right-wing ideologues, including William Simon, Secretary of the Treasury and former bond salesman for New York City, Walter Wriston of Citibank, and the chiefs of staff under Ford, who sequentially were Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, who advised the president that running against New York City liberalism would guarantee his re-election, another colossal snafu on their part. Ford, in consequence, framed the New York City crisis not as the local manifestation of a global recession, which had roots in the war in Vietnam, both its costs and its loss, or the revival of European and Japanese competition, or the oil crisis, or the drain on Frost Belt resources for Sun Belt infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but rather framed it as a local budget crisis caused basically by welfare cheats, public sector unions, and the city's commitment to social democratic programs. The right was already embarked on its plan to roll back those programs, and number 1 on their list of targets was free tuition at the city university. And it was in response to these pressures that in '76, CUNY Chancellor Kibbe recommended that John Jay, along with Richmond and Hostos, be shut down. The mobilization by John Jay that led to a stay of execution would take us too far afield. We did see a fair chunk of it laid out on screen, but we did it, though casualties of combat included the demajoring of much of the liberal arts programming of wrong, only recent righted. For that story and many others, I expect you will hear more from my fellow panelists, and you can, let me underscore this, turn to Professor Gerald Markowitz's Educating for Justice, A History of John Jay College of Criminal Justice, one of the best college histories that I have ever come across. We are lucky to have it and to have him. Thank you.
I want to assure you that this is not like quiz show. Not all the panelists were given questions in advance. Jerry Lynch was not, and I'd like to ask him, and maybe he drew heavily on his background in psychology for this, how did you develop the constituency to save John Jay? There were a number of colleges scheduled to be closed. The only recommendation that was revoked by the Board of Higher Education at that meeting was to close John Jay. How did you do it? How did you build the constituency to save it?
I'm not sure, Sam, but I am sure that I've learned a lot from history as I look at what happened with crime at that time and civil rights and all the other phenomenon that we know about and talked about. But there was something that has evolved in my mind as important as those phenomena, and that is the change in American higher education, going from the technical vocational school into the university. Examples are nursing, which went into the university, teaching, which went into the university and no longer had normal schools, social work went into the university, and I can list 12 others. And so what we're seeing is a professionalization of fields that would have been simply technically isolated. And that's what was true of the police and fire academies. They were isolated from the university. There was nothing in the curriculum of the police academy which discussed philosophy and history and so forth. So I think in retrospect, there was a hunger on the part of Americans for a professionalization of these fields, and that they realized that the only place to get it, unless you developed a whole new structure, was higher education. And higher education could give a bachelor's in nursing, a bachelor's in social work, a bachelor in a lot of other fields, and therefore give credentials to the people, as well as fulfilling a need to be well educated. So what I think maybe, Sam, was that people were really hungry for professionalization. And when we went around the city and said, don't you want to support cops? We could get a lot of good response from everybody, from the left and the right. On the left, we could say, you're getting a more professional police department. You're not getting a pig, you're getting an educated person. On the right, you could say, this is for police. So we're supporting the police. And so shamelessly, in Albany and in Washington, we use the argument, you're getting both the left and the right happy. And
so you did use psychology.
Yeah. Well, I think that there was people like the taxi cab driver that said to the chancellor, are you supporting higher education, or you're trying to not close John Jay? Because the American and the New Yorker, I mean, in this case, really wanted to support the police. They didn't want to hate the police. They didn't want to get into, they wanted to like the police. They wanted to, when they thought about it, professionalize the police. So I think that history will tell us, Mike and Blanche and Jerry, whether there was this phenomenon contributed to John Jay in a macro sense. So that's my thoughts on that subject.
I'm not going to ask whether the cabbie was a part-time John Jay student working his way through college. But let me ask Richard Ward to elaborate on that a little bit. When the college began, it was in the academy early on. It was a college, in effect, of police science. How did it evolve into what Jerry is talking about that has become so prominent today, when we're talking now about recruiting liberal arts undergrads for medical school, not people with a background or major in biology or chemistry, but liberal arts, because they will make better doctors, some analysis has proven. How did the reach, the expanse to liberal arts take place?
Well, I think I'd have to go back to 1962 when I started at John Jay, which was then the College of Police Science, or a police science program. And it evolved until President Reisman was appointed, and unfortunately died shortly. And then with President Riddle, who helped lay the foundation, if you will. But the team that was put together with Jerry, Dr. Lynch, and others on the faculty, I think, are the ones who really set the stage. And I was one of the cops. I was on the other side, so to speak. And we started a newspaper really to protest the liberal movement of the administration. And many of the police officers, many in this room, I know, were a part of trying to understand, what are we trying to learn here? Are we learning police techniques, police tactics? That battle continues to go on in other parts of the world today, I should point out. But the emphasis really was on a liberal arts education, and I guess Don Riddle really stated it probably in the best way by saying, how do you educate cops like anyone else. And as I look back over now too many years, maybe in higher education and still doing it, I look at the audience and think all of you and me. And one of the things I would ask of you, I will write my email address on the board, because really this should be reversed. We should be on the other side listening to you and what your lives have been like as a result of what happened to John Jay. Obviously, I have to say mine was enriched in so many different ways, but through each of the, whether you call them crises, you know, or turbulence, the student body of John Jay stood up. I remember very vividly when the college was going, the threat was there to close the college, and Jerry Lynch really put his job in jeopardy. And the chancellor at the time, I believe, was Bob Kibbe, who said, you know, you've got to stop this stuff. But we met with a guy named Tony Schwartz, who was across the street. He was a PR guy. He helped us design a program. We knew at that point that there were 19 of the 20 board members who were in favor of closing the college. After that campaign, it reversed. It was 19 for keeping it open and 1 for closing it. And not only was the chancellor, I think, amazed by it, but so was the mayor, who I had the privilege of calling a liar on television, and I thought I should get out of New York at the time. But it worked because the student body stuck together. I think that's probably one of the most significant things I've ever been involved in my life, was this group of 2,000 of our students and faculty who walked from here up to 86th Street to send a message to the mayor. But in all of this, there was an understanding, I think, and that led to what today, I guess, is the founding framework of this college, that it is a liberal arts college with a particular professional background. And I've spent most of my life trying to fight for, you know, the professionalization of police. And John Jay has always, in my mind, been one of the great leaders in doing that.
Student movements have accomplished a great deal in this country historically, and probably not many have accomplished more than keeping a college open, as they did in this case. Professor Cook, you co-taught a course, Women in Black and White, to a student body that was almost entirely white and male. What was their reaction to the course, and how did that help you or not bridge the gap, as you described it, between cops and other students before you moved into classrooms with no windows?
Let me just say, the classroom where the windows were broken, it was at the old police academy, and we had veterans. Okay, I mean, it was not just police officers, and you know, the police officers who were veterans disagreed with each other. And that was the class that I lost control of before open enrollment. And it was an incredible, and that brings me to this course on women, which I co-taught with Audre Lorde, the great poet. And it was called American Women in Black and White. And our students were all police officers. And within 2 weeks, they started bringing their wives and sisters and mothers and friends and wives. Did I say wives? Yeah. Twice. And then Audrey and I were known in another community. And so the bar girls down in the village started coming. They heard we were teaching this class. And we were invaded by, you know, the lesbian community. And that was the room. It was full of police officers and their women associates and friends and lovers and relatives and the bar girls who heard we were doing this, and it was magical. And one of the things that, I mean, I'm very proud. It'll be almost 50 years since I've been teaching. I started teaching at an historically black college, Hampton Institute, in 1963. So I've been teaching for a little while. And I got here in 67, I think. And I'm very proud of the fact that I never gave a test. There are no tests. What everybody had to do was make their opinions very clear. And of course, there was no question of right or wrong. There was no question of our agreeing with each other. It was just how crisply and vividly and meaningfully can you write. And my goal as writer was to help you write and express yourselves. And we could respect each other, and we could even love each other across our differences. And coming in, Jim Gilmartin, who was one of the early police officers who were here, said that I changed his life. He had to leave. He's off to Chicago. He now considers himself even a liberal. So the requirements for the course were Howard Zinn, A People's History of the U.S. This is my favorite course that I teach regularly, Violence and Social Change. And the question of what are we teaching? Well, violence in the streets, I argued, was a reflection of mandated institutional violence, poverty, racism, war. And so we talked about poverty, racism, and war. And then we talked about, well, how do we react? And everybody had their own opinion. And all they had to do was express it. And everybody, and this is, I think, the great joy of John Jay, our students were so eager to be informed and to read controversial things, and above all, to write controversial things. So, as you saw in that wonderful film, I always said, in my opinion, when I said something controversial, but we had to disagree. Of course we disagreed. And we could discuss it. And that was really, so the women's class with Audrey and the students, it was magical. I mean, it really was amazing. And I think John Jay has helped to change the world, frankly.
Jerry?
Thank you.
Could I do a personal privilege? It was to answer the question you asked me before. I really think, too, that there were phenomena in the city, like the New York Times, that came out for John Jay, and that preparation for the New York Times to have done that against the City University of New York's Board of Trustees, appointed by the mayor and the governor, that was a phenomenon that was exemplified by your 30th birthday party that I happened to be on at the ship around Manhattan.
Let's not all date ourselves.
But the fact that you were there and I could talk to you in an informal setting was another receptivity of the community, notably the New York Times, I think, in this case, about the value of a cop's education. Thank you.
And obviously, not only talking to me, which I don't think made much difference at the time, but probably talking to the Times editorial board, Jerry Lynch was obviously quite effective. I know this is college and you're on a schedule, so I'm going to turn the podium over to questions from the floor. If there are any, please questions if you can rather than speeches, because we really don't have much time. I have a few more myself, but frankly, I'd rather hear if you have any first. Anyone have anything they'd like to ask the panel?
So I found the discussion putting everything into historical context fascinating. And there's no doubt that it's because the college stuck together that we survived. But individuals are also important. And I just want to be sure to recognize that, excuse me, without the work of Jerry and Dick working together, I think John Jay would not exist. And I just want to make sure they get the credit they deserve.
My recollection as a student in those days, and I remember the march, and I remember yelling, "Kibby, you liar, we roast you on the fire." But I remember Professor Flora Ritter Schreiber also being very involved in the campaign to save John Jay. And I thought we'd be remiss if no one said anything about her contribution.
little bit earlier about the fact that there is a disproportionate number of minority students at John Jay, and now I think among the senior colleges, Jeremy Travis will say it has the highest percentage. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Are these people who wanted to become cops and therefore came to John Jay, or did they come to John Jay and later have an interest in joining the police force, do you think?
I think the early group wanted to become police officers.
And Mike, you also pointed out in the film that you thought while the goal of the college was in part, as Jerry said later, to sort of humanize the police department, to let the police department, people in it reach their potential, a lot of them were shrewder than some of your colleagues. What do you mean by that?
Well, I found that the police, while they weren't crazy about liberals, were kind of very open to radical analysis of the nature of American society because, in fact, they understood better than a lot of people, including myself, the way power works, what life is really like on the streets, who had a sensitivity to, which could manifest itself in a variety of ways, to, in fact, class differences and ethnic differences and the like. They were a pretty sharp group, and also, remember, they were older. These were not wet behind the ears folks. I mean, I had borough commanders in my classroom. The average age was quite substantial. So I thought they were intelligent and eager to learn. I think they felt really that they had been deprived. I mean, the number of people who would work a double shift and who lived out on the island who would struggle into class, barely conscious, but there and determined to participate. I mean, these people were inspiring. And Larry's absolutely right. I mean, the distinctions between the cops is not a monolithic group of people. I mean, apart from being there were white cops and black cops, and eventually Hispanic cops, and eventually women cops, just the debates amongst them were a great learning experience for me. So I think, to some extent, there's this kind of liberal condescension that says poor benighted souls, and some of their behavior is unpardonable, and it's a function of the fact that they are somehow underdeveloped. Whereas, in fact, they have been asked to put themselves in a situation, which is a historically constructed situation, which is explosive, and to, in fact, carry a lot of the burdens that the rest of the society at that point was not prepared to look at too closely. So, some response.
It was a self-selected group, obviously, that came here.
Yes, this is not your average.
How representative was it of the rest of the force?
Well, what can I say? I have a limited demographic statistical base on which to count it, but what I would hear from students who were here was, Professor, they're not all like us out in the street. Now, how accurate this is, who knows? What effect, in fact, the J education made in their policing, I don't know that it's ever been exactly empirically analyzed. People have convictions about it, and I've shared the notion that it was transformative, but hard to say.
I think looking at the audience here, it obviously was transformative for a lot of people. I'm going to end this part of the program on time and turn you back over to Jeremy. And thank you so much for coming, and thanks very much for coming.
I'd like to just call your attention to the back of your program. You'll see a list of members of the Founding Generation Committee, and some of those names have asterisks next to them, which means that they're members of the Planning Committee. So I'd like to ask any member of the committee who's here today just to stand so we can thank you for putting this program together. Members of the committee, so I wanted to take a few minutes before we start our next panel just to bring this story up to date. Here we are in this wonderful new building with all sorts of exciting things happening at John Jay, all made possible by the fact that John Jay was saved back in 1977 and was given this vision that we heard described on the panel, a liberal arts institution for those people who care about justice and care about the professions and carry out that work. But let me just give you some picture of where we are today. This is it's a little just soundbite, so you understand what the composite looks like. First of all, Mike Wallace said we started, or Jerry Marcus said we started with 1,000 students in the first class. We now have 15,000 students at John Jay, so it's grown a bit. We now have programs at all levels of the educational sort of hierarchy. We have 2 doctoral programs that are run by John Jay faculty. Technically they're part of the university, but one in criminal justice, it's ranked 10th in the country. One in forensic psychology, that without question is the best in the country. So we have doctoral programs here. So we had a reunion here outside of this room in connection with ACJS of the John Jay PhD graduates who've gone on to teach in places like Dick Ward's University. And there were 130 of them, I think. So we now are producing the professoriate of our field, which is a great satisfaction. Many of those people are also in practice. And we now have 8 master's programs here at John Jay. And the latest one that's come online is a forensic mental health counseling. It says a lot about our forensic capabilities here. A master's program in international crime and justice. It talks a lot about the reach of our faculty, the reach of our students and their interest, and frankly the transnational nature of the issues of crime and criminal justice and human rights. We have the traditional master's programs, still very popular: public administration, criminal justice, forensic science, digital cybercrime studies. That's a hot master's here. So we have 8 master's programs. Of the 15,000 students, 12,500 are undergraduates. Do you have a question?
Sure. Yeah. Is there an online program?
You're just one point ahead of my talking point. We now have taken one of our master's programs, the master's program on inspections and oversight, and have developed it as a fully online program. So we now have John Jay students who are living in London, John Jay students living in California, John Jay students living in Dublin. We will soon have John Jay students living in Kiev, Ukraine. So the reach of the international reach of John Jay, made possible by distance learning, is a stunning potential on our horizon. So John Jay students won't be sitting in this room in the future. They'll be in many places around the world. So we now have a very exciting program to bring, particularly our master's programs and certificate programs online. For our undergraduates, we're placing more courses online so that they can complete by finishing a course at midnight while the kids are asleep, right? Or early in the morning after you come off a tour. We want to have that capability for our students as well. So online education is going to extend our reach in very important ways. Let's talk about some other key demographics of the college. So that first class of 1,000 students meeting at the police academy was all men, mostly white men. It's not true anymore. If you walked the halls and saw what's the traffic between classes, you saw the students coming in to sit in on our discussion today. 60% of our students are women. We're like any other American college. That's true in any American college. And as Senator Roberts mentioned, we are, of all the senior colleges, we are the most racially diverse. 3/4 of our students are students of color. Let that sink in for a minute. 42% of our students are Hispanic, 25% African American, 9% Asian. So more female, more diverse. That reflects the demographics of the city. That's true generally in CUNY, but we are a stronger draw to minority students than any other senior college. And reflecting the demographics of the city, a lot of our students are immigrant kids, which means that they're New York City kids that grew up here, but they were born somewhere else. So they brought all those cultural traditions, all those language capacities, all those different ways of understanding policing, frankly, and justice, and all those different ways of thinking about human rights and what it means to be, for your families who have emigrated to this country to seek freedom. So all of that becomes part of the classroom discussion at John Jay these days in very, very powerful ways. So half of our students come from families where a language other than English is spoken. 40% of our students were born, literally, in another country and have grown up. They're not international students, but they have an international perspective. So the demographics of the college are quite different from when the college was established in the 60s. Let's just talk briefly about the academics of the program, of the college. So one of the things that I'm proudest of is that we have now returned John Jay to his tradition of being a fully realized liberal arts college. We have now offered, again, majors that were offered when the college was first founded. We now have a long pipeline here. Our first two majors to come through that pipeline were English and economics. English is now one of our fastest growing majors at John Jay, and has within it a track on law and literature, which we are hosting this week. We are now the host for the National Conference on Law and Literature, because our English faculty is so strong in this area. The first two were English and economics. The second two coming through were gender studies and global history. Both of them have very strong enrollment. Coming soon after that were majors that we just offered this year in philosophy and law and society. So our criminal justice ethics program, which Jerry started and has a long-standing tradition here, Center of Criminal Justice Ethics, now headed up by the chair of our philosophy department, who we stole away from Colgate, by the way, to bring him here, a very distinguished philosopher. And we now have an undergraduate ethics program, very strong, and the philosophy major, I'm convinced, is going to be very strong. Law and society, no question, that'll be a strong major. What else is coming down the pipeline? Sociology major, anthropology major, Latin American Latino studies major, African diaspora studies major. We have more majors coming through so that by the end of this basically 10-year span, a student comes here who thinks whatever their professional aspirations, but they really want to study history, or they really want to study economics, we want to provide that opportunity to them here. We will always have, most of our students, my prediction is, will still be criminal justice and forensic science and forensic psychology majors. But the undergraduate life is enriched by liberal arts majors that are not standalone majors, but are integrated into this broad umbrella, stealing Jerry Markowitz's phrase, broad umbrella of educating for justice. There's another big change that's happened over the past few years. This is the change in our admissions policies. So, as I said before we showed the film, John Jay is a hot school. We have a lot of students who want to study criminal justice. I say a special prayer of thanks every morning to CSI. I say thank you for sending those students here. Law and Order, keep it up. All those programs, the spin-off CSI, wherever, keep them coming. All these students at our open house, they say, I've wanted to go to John Jay since I was in 8th grade. Why? Maybe it's mom or dad who's a cop or a lawyer, but it's really those TV shows. So we are a hot school. What we learned is that we could not accommodate the demand and keep our commitment to excellence. So we made a decision 5 years ago with strong support from the faculty senate in our college council to phase out the associate degree admissions. So it used to be that 60% of the incoming students were associate degree students. We phased out admissions to the associate degree programs and have created opportunities for those students to start criminal justice programs in the community colleges of the City University of Florida. So if you don't meet the baccalaureate standard at John Jay now, we admit you to John Jay provisionally as a joint degree student. So we start your criminal justice education. The programs are faculty designed with their faculty collaboratively in those community colleges. With the understanding, if you complete there, we've got a seat for you. So we now have this flow of students coming in as transfers jointly admitted to John Jay community college. So that means our senior college, which is the highest rank in the community hierarchy, senior college, but it also means we have to find replacements for those students. So there's a very good news here about the demand for the education at your institution is that over that same 4-year period, we doubled the number of freshman baccalaureate students. Doubled in 4 years. This is unheard of in the higher education world. There's such a strong expansion in such a short time in baccalaureate admissions without reducing standard grade standards. So we've changed the mix here. So we have more transfer students who are involved John Jay students waiting, stronger admission standards at front door, and new range, a much more variety in terms of the majors that can be a student can declare. Then, to make all that possible, with strong support from the chancellor, very strong support from the chancellor, we went said, if we want us to do all this stuff, we need more faculty. So we started a faculty hiring program that led to the hiring of well over 100 new faculty over the past 5 years. And then something called the recession happened, and we had to slow down that hiring program. And for a while there, we actually, in substitute faculty, we did not be appointed for budgetary reasons. But this past June, something very important happened in our state. So the New Yorkers follow the news closely. This is an important development. In Albany, our legislature, on the advice and urging of our chancellor and with the support of the Governor Cuomo, enacted a tuition policy for the next 5 years, very modest increases in tuition per year, $300 a year per student, so that over 5 years we will be able to recoup some of the lost revenue of the recession. We took budget cuts for 3 years. And at the same time, the legislature enacted a maintenance of effort provision saying that they will never cut the university's budget. This is historic. There's basically a floor been established on the university's budget. So we have a floor established so the money won't go into the right pocket, taken out of the left pocket, and increasing revenue. And it's actually today the budget's being enacted in Albany. This is the first test of that is holding very nicely. So that we are, I announced this to State of College address last fall that over the next 3 years we'll be hiring a net gain of another 40 faculty members. So we will be almost back where we were with new faculty. This is a very good time to be hiring faculty because it's a very good market. Because a lot of public universities, a lot of universities generally, are retrenching, cutting back, hiring more adjuncts. We are now in the market at a very good time for us to hire new faculty. So the faculty strength at John Jay is really remarkable. Look at the scholarly production of our faculty and the books being published, the grants that we've tripled the amount of funding for the scholarship and research activities of our faculty over the past 6 years. And it's because of that. It's really quite stunning. What's happened in the classrooms is quite stunning. We redesigned our general education program, we redesigned a number of our majors, we have a very active faculty development program. The attraction of teaching here is the attraction of our student body. And people come here because they want to teach our students. And they want to be in the classroom and do what they do best. So that's a sort of big picture of where the college is. Now let me just say one other thing. This atrium that we are about to have a reception in after our next panel is a spectacular space. And if you read the Wall Street Journal week or Friday, you'll see an article announcing that the chairman of the John Jay College Foundation Board, Jules Kroll, and you know him, so the Bill Kroll Associates, there was a security business. Jules is a big name. And he, when I came to college, he was the chairman of the board of our foundation. He's our partner, a good friend of mine now, been known for many ways. He's helping position John Jay to engage in private fundraising. So we are having our annual gala here on May 8th. All of you invited, Mark, you are invited, to show off the new building. We do tours of the Jaywalk, Plaza, tours of the upper spaces. Please come. And at the gala, we're going to announce a $50 million campaign for the future of justice to raise money for John Jay. This is a big goal. We are well on our way to meeting that goal. We've already raised $30 million, pleased to say. And this space, this atrium, is going to be named the Linda Jules Kroll Atrium, in recognition of a $2 million gift from Kroll's John Jay. So that's worthy of a moment of applause. New Vice President for Market Development. This is my way of saying I'm going to be tough with you. You know what I mean? Because we would like a strong level of contribution for alumni to the campaign. And on some level, it's not the amount of money, it's really the level of support that people give to their. So if the college has meant a lot to you, and you feel that you've had some success in life, professionally and personally, and in terms of your journey through life, you think that John Jay has been part of that success, and hope that the time comes to respond to that call. So we launched the campaign in May. So, we're about to switch gears again. I'm looking forward to the next panel as I enjoyed the last one. And you'll see if you look at your programming, we have a panel that's called What John Jay Means to Me. And what we decided to do is to invite pairs of alumni and one's perspectives. And this was the really brilliant idea of the planning committee, who said, in the way that Dick Ward did, I think, we want to hear from the people in the room. What's the current student population look like, and what does it mean to you to have been here? So I think I invite you, Reggie, after tells me what to do. I invite them up to the, okay. So if you see your name here, come on up. Herman Banks, graduated in 1979. Conrad Cho was a senior here and very active in our Veterans Club. They will talk about the veterans' perspective. The women's perspective, we have Joyce St. George, who got her BA in 74, and Melissa Grant, who's currently a sophomore. And come up and talk about their perspective on what John Jay means to them. And appropriately enough, we will have the police officer perspective. Ed Donovan, who has 2 degrees, BS in 72 and MA in 76. And Amy Holden, who's currently a junior. So come on up, and we expect to hear a bit from you about how life looks from your different perspectives.
How you doing, everyone? My name is Conrad Cho. I had a different sort of speech planned, honestly, but that documentary kind of changed a lot of things. To be honest with you, I had no idea that these events happened in our past here at John Jay. I want to begin by saying you all left quite the legacy. I was a highly recruited D1 Division I soccer player in high school, and that was all I ever thought I'd end up doing when I, grew up. However, my senior year in high school happened to be 2001 during the whole 9/11 campaign, and immediately I had only 2 options in my mind. First option was fulfill my childhood dream and join the Army. My second option was come to John Jay College. And fortunately for me, I had a recruiter that was somewhat honest. My recruiter told me, your best bet, if you really want to fight crime the way I expressed interest in doing so, he said, your best bet would be to join the military, and then afterwards, go to John Jay. And I did join the Army. I shipped off, came back in 2004 after getting wounded in Iraq, and I immediately came back to school, came to John Jay immediately. The reputation was there, and I was troubled by a few things. Number one, there were under 50 veterans in the entire school, and as expressed in the documentary, I was kind of on the flip side. Some gentleman said that he was a 17-year-old kid sitting next to 20-year-olds with guns on their their hips and everything. I was kind of that 20-year-old instead. I wasn't much older. As I said, physically I looked the same as that 18-year-old kid sitting next to me. However, mentality-wise, we were completely different. I felt they didn't understand me, I didn't understand them. And I quickly dropped out of school. Lasted less than a month and a half, maybe. 2 years went by where I did absolutely nothing with my life. And I finally decided, let's give this school thing one last shot. When I returned, I was fortunate enough to have Professor Giordani, who expressed to me, I know you're not enjoying school right now, but if you stick it out, you're going to see in the next few years a lot of veterans are going to start returning, and they're going to be coming to this school, John Jay. And sure enough, by 2008, we had over 200 veterans in the school. By 2009, we had over 300, etc. Currently, we have over 650 veterans in the school. And the type of veteran that this school attracts, I cannot speak more highly about. We have the most special group of veterans that I'm thoroughly honored to tell you I'm close to show you how far your efforts reached, how your reputation. We have, as I brag, the only command master chief in the entire CUNY system attending this school as an undergrad, which for the Navy gentlemen I heard speak, you know exactly how special that is for a command master chief from the Virgin Islands to know about this school and attend. I always brag about going to all CUNY receptions and saying, look at all the different CUNY vets that are here, and look how John Jay outnumbers them all. We outnumber all the veterans from all the other CUNY schools combined. President Travis has really recently made it a priority to give the veterans the special treatment they deserve, and I fully believe with your backing, with his backing, the veterans here are going to fly like they never have before. So I just want to thank you all once again.
Hello, everybody. I feel like I'm home. I'm seeing faces of people who I haven't seen in such a long time, and it's just, it's thrilling. Okay, so I am supposed to talk about what it was like to be a female at John Jay during the old days. And the fact that we're talking about the old days and I'm supposed to talk about it is really freaking me out. I will say that although each one of us was quite different, there were maybe about 10 of us at the time at the police academy. Hey! About 10 of us. About right. We, and this is something that any female who's going through the college right now, we had to put up a protest to get a bathroom. It seemed like either the college didn't think that we needed one, had no biological needs, or they just had an oversight. But that was one of the first things females had to do in those days at the academy, was find a way to go to potty. And as much as we were different, one of the things that I felt back in the 70s, in the late 60s, early 70s, was it was very difficult to come to John Jay as a student, a civilian student, and be amongst all the men. And usually we were all of maybe one, possibly two female students in the class, which meant that for some of us, we stopped wearing skirts. For others, they upped the skirts. I'm just saying. The other thing, and I think the most important thing about John Jay, was that it served as a living laboratory for us. We had no idea what we were going into, but we knew we were going to be shattering some kind of a glass ceiling because women were not very involved in policing at the time, nor were they welcomed in many, many respects. So John Jay actually put us in a laboratory so that we could learn how to speak cop. We could learn the language in the classrooms. We could hear the perspectives. We could gain the insights so that when we finally did get on the job, or however you want to call it these days, we had some experience on how to speak with police officers, what expectations they had of us, what expectations we should have of them. So I thought that was a very, very important part that I don't think many people think about. The other thing about being a female, and I'm sure it worked out for many of the men, in those days, John Jay was so unique. Again, going back to President Lynch and Dr. Ward and some of the other early administration and faculty people, it was embryonic. Nobody knew what to expect. And because we were there and we were some of the first women who were going to step onto the field of law enforcement, we had to depend on a lot of people there to help us. And I can tell you from my own experience, I had mentors up the wazoo. Somebody like Dick Ward, somebody like just average cops who were taking us in, like Bob Burke, like Leon Flowers, people who had already been on the job, who understood what we were going to be facing, who helped us, who helped mold us to be the kind of person that we needed to be successful. And then we had these incredible role models. You talk about Audre Lorde and Blanche. I mean, where else do you find the quality of women in academia that you would have found in those days? I mean, it was extraordinary for people of that level of knowledge and experience to share what they had with us. So we found ourselves modeling ourselves after somebody like Blanche Cook, who you do not want to mess with, by the way. And I have studied her, so don't mess with me. We learned what strong women were about. We learned how to be strong and smart. Somebody like Karen Kaplowitz, who is 4'0", who came into this college as a young literature major who wanted to help out with the newspaper at the time, who really had nothing except her knowledge, her experience, and her grace. She found ways to engage police officers in ways you could never have imagined. So I think when you talk about John Jay, every college will have their mentors and will have their role models. But for people like me, who was coming into my own and who was daring to go into a very male-dominated field at the time that I knew would not be as friendly as I would like it to, they prepared us. The other thing, and other colleges do that, but not in the way John Jay would have, because it was so singular, it was so unique, and it was so committed in what it was, in its mission, and what it was trying to do to help us. And then finally, and this again happens in most colleges, but in terms of my experience, I found some of the greatest people to remain with, to spend my life with. I married a John Jayer. Of course, he graduated after I did. But I married a John Jayer. My best friends are John Jayers, still till today, who I call sisters. The people I depend on, who I call, who help me shape my organization that I've been running for about 40 years now, are from John Jay. So many people will talk about how a college changed them. What I would talk about is how a college formed them. And I was lucky enough to have been the first female hired at the New York State Special Prosecutor's Office during the early 70s, after the Knapp Commission and after Serpico testified and after the horrendous amount of corruption that was seen throughout the entire criminal justice system. I would have never gotten that job had it not been for the people at John Jay. They handed my resume in, I didn't. So when I say that this college can mold you, and I'm talking to students who are still here, if you grab everything it has to offer, it's just such a unique, just an incredibly innovative, very unique opportunity for you. Grab everything you can and let it mold you as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Grant, and I'm a sophomore here, and I will be speaking on the perspective of being a young woman at John Jay today. So, to reiterate, I'm a sophomore, so I started 2 years ago, in 2010. Coming to John Jay, I had a lot of expectations, which they are all being fulfilled. I didn't know really what to expect. I was leaving high school, coming right into college. I was excited to come to a new college campus. And so it was a real interesting journey for me, and it still is. And every day here is filled with new potential, and I just try to embrace it as the days go on. So coming here, I knew right from the start that there were a lot of opportunities that would be presented to me, and what I would have to do is to just make the best of it. And being a female, I find that there are tons of capacities here, and it allows females to rise to the occasion. Unlike the 70s, today, there are female bathrooms, which I'm happy, because hearing your speech, Ms. George, I would not want to know what it would be like. So I'm happy that there are lots of female bathrooms. The corridors are lined. Also, to comment on something that you said, that there are tons of females. It's not like females are marginalized anymore. And I'm happy that I came to the school at a time like this where females are not at the edge. They're not in the minority, but I think we're all almost in the majority. And the classrooms feel like it's equal. So there's not a disparity in the amount of male-female ratio. And I'm excited about that. And as you suggested, the lab test, John Jay Bean Laboratory, the tests were successful, and also the ceiling has been shattered, and I'm excited about that also. So not being a police school anymore, and John Jay developing it to be a liberal arts school, it makes it easier for a lot of young people like myself, because my major is culture and deviant studies. Ask me what I want to become at the moment, I'll tell you I'm not sure. I know I'm in the right field though. And so academically, it works for me here at John Jay, because apart from doing good in my classes, getting A's, I find that there are other opportunities that I can partake in, and it only builds me more as a woman. Also, the faculty here, they're great. They keep reminding us that getting good grades are one thing, but it's also important for you to get involved and network. And that is like something that keeps coming back to me every day. My one-on-one English teacher is saying, do something, become active. I'm currently taking a corrections class, and my professor, every day she comes to class, she brings a newspaper clipping, and she says, do the right thing, get involved. And so these faculty members like these here at John Jay, it helps students, because it helps to not only empower them, but it encourages them to do well. And so being here at the school, I feel proud to be a John Jay student. I feel like it's a place where I belong. Finally, I would just want to mention that there are tons of opportunities for us to get involved in. I study at the Women's Center, and it has helped me to build a lot of skills that I never thought that I had, and I enjoy every moment of it. And so working there has really made me realize that there's a long way to go in terms of justice issues for women, but I just realized that I'm at the point in my life where I have to join that cause. Also, I'm also a representative for the Office of Community Outreach, and so coming here, I immediately got involved in everything that I could do to not only have good grades, but also to make sure that I have something else that I can put on my resume. And working in the office, I'm also having new skills built. I'm learning something new every day, and it has made me become somebody that I never knew I could become, because recently I just had an event. It was an open mic, and it was against domestic violence, and I pretty much planned everything for myself with the help of the office and fellow reps. I planned most of the event. I executed it. It was a success. I raised money, and I will be donating it to Safe Horizons. And so I'm only 21 years old, and wouldn't have imagined myself doing so much things at 21. I'm not even 21 yet, I'm 20. So I'm just 20 years old, and I'm thinking that I'm on a path that I do not want to be anywhere else. I'm at a college that I'm proud to be a part of. I feel like I belong here. I've been spending a lot more time here than I've been spending at my house. I leave here at like 6, 7 o'clock in the evenings, especially in the week of planning. So it has helped me to build a lot of skills, a lot of new skills. And so John Jay is just a great school. I'm enjoying every moment of it. I have 2 years left, and I'm not looking for them to be done anytime soon. And being a young female here, I realized that I have a path that I need to make sure that I accomplish something, because there were a lot of females before me who have made something of themselves, and I want to follow in that same trend. And just to say that last week I visited the Harlem Community Center, the Harlem Community Justice Center, and the director of the Harlem Community Center, it was a John Jay student, and his assistant was a female, and she was also a John Jay student. And I looked into that, and I'm like, John Jay is running the world, or John Jay seems to be taking over the justice system of New York, which is great, because at least I'm attending John Jay, and when I leave, I'm in a better position to get a job. So I'm happy here, and I'm excited when I've accomplished my degree, and I'm just on that path. I still have 2 years left, but it's great being a student here now. There are a lot of bathrooms again, and so everything here is just great. This new building, it makes the campus more exciting. And as I said before, I'm not looking for the 2 years to end anytime soon. If it does come too soon, I'll be coming back on my graduate degree.
I've been asked to make a few comments about the impact of John Jay College on me as a police officer while attending John Jay. I can't speak for all police officers, but I can speak for myself. And I think my experience closely resembles the experience of so many others. I'll also mention the impact that this college has had on me personally. Edward Conlon, in his book, Blue Blood, suggests it might be said that education is an adjustment of expectation. The question I ask myself is, what did I expect, or what did we expect from John Jay? What was the benefit? What was going to happen? What was the end result? We heard back in the 60s the word professionalization. We heard the term humanizing cops. We heard sensitivity. We heard better performance. And it goes on and on. Realistically, I think only the naive believe that that would happen overnight. It is a long process that is not complete yet. The professionalization of police is not there. Many departments consider themselves to be professional. They're only technically proficient. But we're going to get there. And we're going to get there because of this place. And some others that resemble it. One of the problems that we faced, particularly those of us in the lower ranks as we were going through school, was that we didn't have an idea what the big picture was. And I would venture to say that even high-ranking officers who were in class with me, they didn't have a clue either about what was going on. We, as was mentioned earlier in a different way, but we were dealing with very complex human problems out on the street. And I think sometimes some professors thought that they had the answers to these complex problems when They didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And we didn't know either. We didn't know the answers as well. We thought we did, but we didn't really know. We had to overcome the challenges that John Jay presented us. Some of those challenges were handling criticism from some of our peers and some of our superiors about being college guys, and you don't need a degree to be a cop. And the criticisms went on and on. I might also add that in the academic world, there are still a few critics who don't believe that criminal justice is a legitimate academic discipline. So those of you who are on faculty, pay attention to that and be aware of them. They're saboteurs. Criminal justice is a very good academic discipline, producing very good students. Much to my boss's dismay, I'm going to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld. He said at one point when he was finishing his career or when he wrote his book, and I'm paraphrasing, I did not know what I did not know. This type of enigmatic puzzle within a maze started to get sorted out, for me anyway. I realized that there was a lot I didn't know, and it became more evident with the classes I took here. And when I studied under the guidance of people like Niederhofer, Pollock, Seeley, Shatter, Blumberg, Fowler, and even a guy named Jerry Lynch, some of the haze started to disappear, and I started to see things a little more clearly. And I started to understand what I didn't know. And that was probably the first step in starting to find out what I should know. Like most police officers, I learned a lot on the streets of Brooklyn. That's where I was raised, that's where I lived, that's where I patrolled. I thought that was a great classroom. And before coming to room 512 in the police academy, I thought that that was my classroom. That was what I needed to learn. John Jay College started to teach me what I didn't know, and it was uncomfortable. And I think a lot of us who were street cops and coming into the nice college atmosphere of honest exchange of ideas, sometimes table pounding debates with professors, we did start to learn a lot. I heard some of my fellow students complain about having to take a math course, or they grumbled about having to read Camus or Joyce. Their cries were all similar. This crap won't help me in Red Hook. When I go in and handle a domestic dispute, do I quote Shakespeare? Well, I came to learn that the discipline of learning involved more than just reading crime statistics or investigative procedures. It involved reading what the professor teaching literature wanted us to read. It involved learning another language for at least a year. It involved the science course, and it involved the math course. That was the discipline of learning that set us up to be better students in criminal justice. To me, the discipline of learning meant that I had to prove to the faculty here at John Jay that I was worthy of a degree from this institution. I also had to prove to myself that I earned it. And that sometimes was difficult. So the question that I've been pondering ever since Reggie got hold of me is what impact did it have on me as a police officer? Well, I thought I was sensitive. I was raised in an Irish Catholic home. My parents taught me to be tolerant. So what did it teach me? Well, taking courses in some of the social sciences and having discussions with professors about some of the social sciences, and also taking a course in research and a course in statistics. And I tried to apply that, particularly when I got promoted into the police department and I was in charge of a unit. And believe it or not, it started to work. I defined the problem more clearly because I remembered the word empirical. One of the big college words I learned. And, along with this, Anita Hopper, who was a friend to me and to hundreds of others, I might add, he had a favorite word. His word was think. He said that probably 50 times a session. If you disagreed with him and raised your hand and said, I disagree with you, and he said, well, fine, what's your problem? And you could lay it out, and then he would say, think about what you just said, or think about what you read, or think about the impact that it's going to have. Well, think. That's all he did. He drove me crazy with that word. But it was a good word. And he knew that good thinking precedes action of any type. So he, again, got me to the point where I was thinking a lot about my situation in the police department. I started to think about my situation as a husband, father. I never heard Arthur mention the term, be a critical thinker. That didn't seem to be in his vocabulary. I never heard him say anything about become an agent of change. Again, he had a very realistic view of who we were and what we were doing, and he knew what the organization was like. NYPD, he knew what it was. So he didn't want people going in and mucking up things and getting in trouble and putting their career at risk and so on. The experience I had at John Jay impacted me greatly in my personal life. This wonderful place gave me an opportunity to move on in the police department, where I wound up my career there as an instructor at the police academy. And I wound up in the academic world. I wound up in the faculty position at Pennsylvania State University. So I hope that I bring with me the spirit of John Jay and the people who mentored me, people I mentioned earlier. They were great role models, and I hope that I was able to touch just a few lives of undergraduate students and get them into law enforcement. Now, to use Arthur's word, I think I've said enough. And I would just like to take this opportunity. I've never done this before. I've never even written a letter of thanks. But thank you to John Jay. Thank you to the professors I had. Thank you to the colleagues that struggled with me. And you folks don't realize, I don't think, maybe we're helping you today, but I don't think you realize the impact that you've had on the lives of students particularly those of us who entered the academic life a little bit later than an 18-year-old. You helped us discover what we did not know, and that's important. Thank you.
That's pretty powerful. Joyce, thank you for those reminiscences and personal reflections on what your John Jay education meant to you. It means a lot to all of us who are here at the institution now. Thank you to Conrad for work we continue to do together. We've set as a goal increasing our outreach to those in the armed services now, wanting to find their way to John Jay, this is their interest, and veterans who are now are a big part of that. And thank you to Jalissa for talking about your project. She's part of an organization, an office as well as community outreach service learning office, where it helps students become involved on a volunteer basis. Project around the city, and it's really an important part of your personal education. I want to say some thanks before inviting Richard Toller to the podium. But before doing that, I just want to note this is a statement of the vitality of this institution. Before coming to meet with you this afternoon, I spent about half an hour or so sitting in the back of the theater, we now call the Gerald Lynch Theater, because our faculty and students and staff are having a teaching there about the Trayvon Martin case. The theater was packed. The lower level was absolutely filled. And as I left, there were 2 long lines of students coming to the microphone to talk about their experience. And on the podium were members of our faculty in teaching fashion, talking about, you should read this book, listen to this poem, talk about these data. So here we were, as a community, taking what I think is a pretty horrific example of what's very deeply troubling about our country, and saying, as a community, let's come together and make this an experience that brings us together. So I just want you to know how strong and vital the community is. These 2 things are happening on the same day, literally steps away from each other. You may have heard the jazz band starting to play, so there's music and reception awaiting you, but allow me, before I introduce this, to say a couple of thank yous. One is, this really follows on what Ed was saying. Would the faculty members in the room just stand so that we all say thank you to you for the work that you're doing? Personal experience and satisfaction from the gathering and from the stories you heard on the stage. I want to ask you in a formal way to join me in asking to say thank you to Ray Grayson, put the day together. Brilliant colleague in many ways. And this is a chance for me to introduce another person who's very important to all of us. We're very fortunate, I was very fortunate, that when I came to college, Mike McCann agreed to stand for election as president of the Alumni Association. There are 30,000+ of you around the world. I literally mean around the world. I'll tell a little story. I was at the Senate Domingo meeting with a pretty high-level meeting there, talking about a partnership we have with the government there to do some police trainings, help them with crime analysis, help them set up their first ever DNA lab. I always, when I travel, say, it's called the American Embassy. I had to say to the officials from CUNY University coming to just to pay our respects. I think it's something that it's important for me to do as an American. This time I got a request for a breakfast meeting with a chargé from the embassy. And I said, fine, I knew from his title that he was in charge of some security planning in the region. And he said, yeah, I want to talk about security planning, but I really don't need you because I'm John Jay Law. So there we were, having breakfast at Senate Domingo. And it happens everywhere you go. And this is the global reach. So we are trying to get in touch with the alumni. I think we've done a pretty good job. If you're not already online and getting the alumni news, you should do that. But the key partner for me in this effort has been my buddy, Mike McCann. He is everywhere. Saturday we had law day here, there was Mike. We go to something all around in Washington, there's Mike. He believes firmly in this institution. His sentence, which he asks people to finish, so this is your exercise to leave here, is, but for John Jay. Finish the sentence. You just finished it. You just finished it. But for John Jay, what would life have been like? So he challenges the alumni to get engaged, to get involved in college. I'm looking around to see where he is. Where's Mike? There's Mike again. So, thank you, Mike. And now, my partner in this effort was in a meeting in my room, and this idea, light bulb first went off in my office with my friend from many years, Dick Bowler, and I asked the chair of this committee, that was an easy ask, he said, absolutely, let's do it, and here it is, and I just want to invite him to give us some closing remarks before we listen to the jazz and a reception on Saturday. Rich Bowler.
First of all, thank you everybody for coming. I would like to finish by reiterating some of the things that were said already by Jeremy regarding the Alumni Association. We were meeting, first of all, I've been very, very active here at John Jay for quite some time. I was a professor here, full tenured professor for a while, involved in a lot of committees. I think I've done that because I've been so grateful for what John Jay has done for me. And in my visits here, I also spent some time with the Alumni Association, with Mike McCann, looking at what the Alumni Association was doing. And it was my sense that people from my generation, I graduated, I guess, 39 years ago, really didn't have a good picture of how great John Jay was, how wonderful the students are here, and how very like us the students are here in a sense. I was a high school dropout, had to struggle, became a police officer, worked, and came to school. Many of the students here have many of the same issues affecting them, where they work and they have children and they're struggling just like we did back there when I was a cop and came to John Jay. There were many similarities, many differences. It's a much bigger place, an amazing place, a place that I'm very, very proud of. When I met with Jeremy, we talked about how can we get the Alumni Association, the people in the Alumni Association, more involved. Many people in the Alumni Association have security firms. Myself, I have a law firm. I employ some people from John Jay. I found them to be terrific. How could we bring in the Alumni Association and some of those who haven't participated too much in the past and have them exposed to what's happening here at John Jay now and perhaps get more involved? I found it to be terrific. The more involved I am at John Jay, the more satisfied I am in terms of my own self and my own experience and my own contribution that I can make going forward. So the thought was, if we did something, some kind of a gathering, which involved people from the Alumni Association, people from the founding generation, students from the founding generation, faculty from the founding generation, we could bring everybody together and get a better understanding and perhaps re-energize the activities of the Alumni Association in terms of not only picking your pockets, which I'm very happy to help John Jay do. $50 million is a lot of money, but also other things, the fields that you're working in, the access that you have to jobs, the relationship with John Jay. It's very easy to come here and get some very, very good people and employ some very, very good people. I was very interested in hearing the young veteran who spoke here. I didn't realize there were 600 young veterans here at John Jay. When I came here, well over half of the police officers were veterans who were in the class. It was the Vietnam period of time. I learned more about John Jay every day that I'm here, and I learned more of more ways that I can say thank you to John Jay. Because as I said in the tape-up here, when I quit school, went in the United States Navy, got out, I was a high school dropout, I couldn't get with an equivalency diploma into any college in the city of New York. I became a cop, they took me as a cop, and I got into John Jay's. Thank you, John Jay. Graduated from here, summa cum laude, got a scholarship, master's degree in urban affairs. Thank you, John Jay. Went on to law school. Thank you, John Jay. Saying thank you, John Jay is an important part of it. Feeling thank you, John Jay is an important part of it. But at this point in my life, giving back in a practical way is more a part of it. I'd like as many people as possible to do the best they can for John Jay in terms of saying thank you, employ John Jay graduates, donate money to John Jay, and say thank you in a meaningful way. And thank you for being here.
So our program is over. Let's mingle outside, get to know each other, catch up on all the years, intervening years. Upstairs we'll have the dinner for the alumni event, and see you there.
Yeah.